Welcome back to Gathering, Ep.7. This time around, we are in studio with Max Chen from Sonder. Sonder is a very interesting company, and Max is a very interesting guy. So beyond just the company that you belong to, I think from what we were just talking about off camera, there's a lot to your personal life and career history in different countries that will play into this conversation. And I'm really excited about that because we have an audience that is, obviously in this whole people and culture world, dealing with all sorts of aspects of kind of rapidly globalizing companies that are distributed around the world. Now everyone seems to be hiring the best talent wherever they are, now that we don't need to go to the office.
Yeah.
So lots to talk about. But let's kick it off, Max, with a little bit of an introduction.
Thanks for having me on the podcast. This is great. This is actually really exciting.
Nice.
So, my name is Max, and I work for Sonder now. I've worked for other companies before, like Expedia, and before that, I was in real estate feasibility. In terms of where I've worked, I started studying hospitality in Switzerland. Before that, I was living in South Africa, and then I started my career in Dubai. So I've done, Africa, a little bit of Europe, and then went to the Middle East. From there, I went back to South Africa for a little bit with Expedia, and now I'm here in Canada, looking after North America, basically with Sonder.
Wait, so how long has it been that you've been in Toronto?
2 years.
2 years? Okay.
2 years. I barely feel like a Torontonian.
Did you choose to live in Toronto, or was that the condition of the job with Sonder at the time?
No, I joined Sonder when I was in Montreal, like mid-pandemic. I got to know the Sonder tech guys by playing board games with them in a WeWork. Yeah, I was jobless at the time. I had a job that I thought was lined up with Expedia. It fell through during the pandemic with my work permit and everything. And, just to kind of talk about the power of co-working space, my wife worked for WeWork at the time. So I was hanging out in the area. I was, doing some certificates to upskill myself, which I think is a whole, something we could talk about, like a whole sub-industry of selling you certificates, like it's going to guarantee you a job in some way.
Yeah, the whole LinkedIn learning and everything like that.
So I was doing that, but what did come out of it wasn't necessarily the job from the certificates. It was the relationships that I've made, playing board games, getting to know the guys, and then when the company started hiring again, I think it was a lot of personality, but learning, hey, you actually come from Expedia, you're an industry that's very much related. I started working with Sonder there. My wife got moved to Toronto for her job. And I moved
at WeWork.
Correct. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. So Toronto wasn't something I expected.
Yeah.
I thought I was going to be in Montreal for a while.
It's a groovy city, right?
It's cool.
I love Montreal. That's where I went to university.
Yeah. Oh, really?
So I was there from 98 to 2003 almost. Like after I graduated from McGill, I was unemployable. Because I was in business. Like I started as a BCom, and then I quickly got out of that because it just felt too much like, I moved to Kenya in 92, right? So as a Canadian, I escaped going to Canadian high school.
Right.
So when I was in business at McGill, it felt very much like I somehow was back a few steps and in high school. Everyone in the BCom program at McGill were these like keener Canadian. Maybe also because like the aesthetics of the building, like the Bronfman building in McGill was like a cinder block building with tube lights, and I don't know, it wasn't my vibe. And so very quickly I just stopped going to the mandatory classes. Got a few calls over the years from the administrators saying like, you're the only student that seems to we don't even know how you're still in the program. And I'm like, I can't transfer out. I've been trying for 2 years.
Honestly, I've been in the Middle East, so that's the extreme weather, and people make fun of me, saying you went from the desert to one of the coldest places on earth, and just, the subject of weather is always a bit of a bore, but you can die in this weather.
You can die. It's serious.
So as a student, I can't imagine, the lack of motivation if this is how it felt. And
but it wasn't even like a lack of motivation for me, because actually the way I looked at it, I went to Montreal. I didn't go to McGill, And so even the stuff that I ended up learning and getting degrees in at McGill, it was all stuff that I couldn't learn otherwise. Right. That's why I decided really quick. I was like, a BCom is a stupid degree, and I still believe this. It's a dumb degree because you can learn it in a book. Like it's all textbook stuff. So why would I spend 4 years of my life when I'm becoming an adult, doing things that I could have done when I was a teenager?
Yeah.
That was my logic, and so I actually did a degree in religious studies, comparative religion, looking at Hinduism and Buddhism, and then I also did an independent study, kind of analyzing the urban context that led to the evolution of electronic music in North America.
Wow.
Yeah, just random shit.
What a journey.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it was interesting. I was going to ask you more about like what made you go to Kenya. Like what was the inception of the idea, kind of?
Yeah, it's a great
Nairobi.
question. Like, not many people even ask that when I tell them that we moved there when I was 11. Like, what it was my parents, were from Kenya, right? So we're like 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 generation Kenyan.
Oh,
So their parents moved from India.
wow.
Yeah, and so they had a claim to being Kenyan, and I think what happened was with Idi Amin kind of wrecking Uganda in the early 70s, and expelling all Asians, East Asians, South Asians, every kind of Asian he could lay his hands on from the region, from the country. A lot of people got spooked in the region, and so East African Indians essentially started looking elsewhere for where they can live. And my parents were part of that. They lived in Kenya, so it was relatively stable economy and everything. It was being built at the time, and they just kept hearing from their relatives like, "Hey, this might not be that good. Where
Yeah.
else could you go?"
Yeah,
And then they came here.
Canada.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Montreal, no less. Like, sorry, Toronto.
was-
Then you went to Montreal.
Well, my parents moved to, where did they go? They went to Vancouver for a bit. That's where they landed. Then they went to Edmonton. They went to Calgary, back to Edmonton, then to Calgary, and that's where I was kind of in the mix. My brother was born in Calgary. I was born in Edmonton. And so we grew up there in Alberta for the first like 10, 11 years of my life. So I moved from Calgary to Nairobi. And then
Wow.
from Nairobi is when I moved to Montreal to go to university. But yeah, like after McGill, man, I stayed in the city because the city made sense to me.
Right.
It's like it's a furtive environment for cultural experiences,
Right. Yeah.
which is what a cool international city should be.
Yeah.
So-
Yeah. 100%.
So that's where you moved. That was your first Canadian city that you lived in.
Yeah. Yeah. My wife was already there at the time. I actually got married in Montreal.
You met her in Montreal?
No, got married. We studied together,
Oh,
actually.
okay,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
okay.
So it sounds like a bit of a, college romance thing. It really wasn't. Our relationship started at the end, and then we went together to Dubai, and we, worked there. I actually had a really good life, but I ultimately, for my career, I wanted to go back from real estate into e-commerce.
Okay.
And so I joined Expedia, and they needed someone in Africa. So I went back home, one could say, to
Yeah.
South Africa, and I looked after like Africa, Indian Ocean, and Israel.
Interesting.
Same, like they considered one region, but they very much
Right.
can handle their own stuff. And from South Africa, a lot of you can imagine the headquarter functions and the big jobs with Expedia are
Yeah.
in North America. So when she had moved to Montreal first, I always knew I was going to join her, and I was just waiting for the right opportunity, to get over. In the end, it didn't work out that way.
Yeah,
in the
you
end,
were just like playing checkers in a
yeah,
WeWork.
I was like, you have to get the job first, but then that, and then I was just like, when the job fell through, I was like, no, that's it. I'm moving. I'm gonna try a new country. I've moved enough in my life. I think I'm pretty confident I can make it work. So
Yeah.
Canada's
Well, to
been
move to like minus 40, Montreal,
also, I had a little bit of French.
you got to have balls,
Yeah, but I had
Yeah, you can know French, but you need balls.
and you gotta find them in that weather as well.
Oh my God, man.
But yeah, no, it's been a great move. It's a great place. It comes with its challenges,
Right.
and I think COVID anywhere is not the normal place.
Yeah, and for our audience outside of Canada, I mean, like the lockdowns that we had in Quebec and Ontario were like some of the most strict in the world.
Very much
Right?
so. Yeah.
So it was kind of a crazy experience to like land here, and then what you guys even had a curfew in Montreal, no?
Yeah, we did.
So you couldn't go out at night or something.
It's funny, I don't remember that very well.
Yeah,
I-
it's just wiped out of your brain.
yeah, it would just, okay, in the beginning it was nice, I think maybe still the honeymoon phase of, being married, and then it was actually Toronto that really got me. Moving to a new city, we already had a group of friends, and, it lines up pretty well with kind of what your podcast is about. The work environment I really had a critical look at my job, because I said, hey, I'm used to working in new places. My previous role was very much sales orientated, so it allowed me to meet a lot of people. When I moved to a new city, a new country, I would fly and travel a lot to see new faces, learn new things. I found like a big part of that was lacking. Didn't have an office to go to. So yeah, I have great colleagues. I have met some very smart people because of what Sonder is. A startup environment, we hired some very, very sharp individuals, but they're just on a screen. It's hard to really, once you get the feeling of accomplishment of like a project is done or you met certain milestones.
Yeah.
It's not the same when you're trying to, grab a beer by
Everyone
yourself.
takes a laptop to the pub.
Happy hour, and I have on a Friday, and I'm pretty much going, after I'm done drinking with you guys,
Oh man.
I'm going to go drink with my wife. So
When in 20, when was this? Actually, it wasn't even 2020. 2021, I incubated a couple of new ventures at StartWell here. I launched a couple of companies, betting on two things that were going to, no matter how long this crazy pandemic was looking to last, I was like, I want to kind of like, I had this great hypothesis, which is, can I seed the evolution of new companies that could be my tenants, coming out of this, right? So then I don't need to go look for tenants at StartWell, and we could co-work our own companies. And it was a great idea, but it was all bootstrapped, which meant that it was, ultimately short-lived. But one of them was called Shakerton, and Shakerton is a great brand, shakerton.com. I started building a catalog, a VOD catalog, like video on demand, of instructional videos for mixology. And
Wow.
then we used those with a live instructor to do like mixology classes for corporations. And the ultimate goal was that we would take this catalog and we'd shop it to hotel chains to be training resources for distributed staff, so that the bartenders could become mixologists. We would offer a certification, and we'd evolve a whole training program. But yeah, we did tons of business, and we got great clients like Air Miles and RGA, and all of these like big companies were using Shakerton for animating their weekly, the end to the week for everyone at home. And what we do is my instructor would teach a couple recipes for like 30 to 50 to 200 coworkers, like all sorts of different sizes, live on a live stream. We'd have some like virtual event platform, and everyone for that would be shipped out a cocktail kit to their house. So they're all like mixing, and it was so sad to me to see this happen, actually, because everyone, when they were like, I was, when we were in studio, we're like in one of our bar spaces on campus, and it was like, we're in a bar.
Yeah.
I assumed everyone would take their laptop into their kitchen for this or something, but I didn't think it through, man. When you see the tiles on the screen of all the different heads and everyone's at their desk.
Oh.
And then it's cringy because like the team leads are like, hey, Jim, I see you over there. I hope you're ready to put your pen down or something, and it's like, no, it just doesn't translate, this whole like come to the common room thing. And then everyone's at their desk, like in their living room. Maybe they've got like a dog on their lap, or they're like little kids like, Papa. And he's like, not now, I'm working, while he's like mixing cocktails. It's depressing.
You definitely need that group like alcoholism to kick in and for that environment,
oh
right?
my God.
It's funny you say that, because Expedia was a great place, for that kind of party vibe and everything. And it built
I think we even did a session or two for Expedia.
But they started cutting back on encouraging drinking. They made some new rules about only X amount of drinks. And I think one of the rules that really stuck out to me was, in their corporate events, no manager or no employee may pour another employee a drink. Don't quote me verbatim on that, but it was like a rule like that. So over an X number of people attending, they had to get a professional bartender, and only that bartender may serve drinks.
But maybe that was like, a rule cooked up to eliminate classism.
Yeah, and that philosophically can get very, very touchy.
Like, tonight I'm not your boss, Jim. I'm just your friend. Let's ask Fred over there, the hired bartender, to pour us 50 drinks.
I think everyone just got too scarred by that one colleague who would just always pour way too much alcohol and then just like a splash. You've seen those jokes where they use the spray bottle to spray on the orange or something like that. Maybe it's from that.
That's really funny.
I think it's a lot of people who I think they had a lot of cases where people got way too drunk, right?
Yeah, and it's an interesting point. I mean, like, I think on one hand, you've got this, like, how do you animate your virtual team and kind of like give them experiences that are shared? And then on the other hand, it's kind of like those experiences now, and again, this is one of the big hot topics for everyone, right? Is talking about wellness.
Exactly.
So you want to animate your team's experiences as much as you can and make them fun, but they should also be kind of like fulfilling as experiences and have a lasting effect that's positive. A lot of people we're talking to are having like a little bit of difficulty figuring out what that is, you know?
Yeah. Because a little stipend here and there. I think in the beginning, playing virtual games online, like
Minecraft?
no, much more simpler than that.
Oh, okay.
What's the Beyond Us, the little figurines where you're on a spaceship?
I don't
forget
even
that
know.
name. Yeah. So that was pretty popular in our every Friday. You know, everybody gets a stipend to buy 6-pack of beers or a burger.
Yeah.
Falls off pretty quickly after a while. You know, people you can only play Hangman so many times and Scrabble. You know, all those.
Oh, it's so true. Like, yeah, one of our member companies is a company called that we work with is called Venue, and Venue was started by one of the co-founders of TechTO, which is the largest, let's call it, subscriber base of innovators and startups in the country, really. And we talked about their solution. It's kind of cool because they're really big on like engagement tools and live streaming. So they're like, instead of group activities online and having people go off into their own virtual rooms to like play these Hangman games, they're really focused on let's all talk to each other, and what that content what the content is up to whoever's using the software. But the software allows you all these positive feedback things. So you can like vote up what people say, and you can kind of like do all this kind of stuff to like make it more fun, supposedly, to video conference essentially.
Isn't that what some people think is toxic about social media, which is like trying to say the right thing and get people's attention?
That's a good point.
It's
a good point.
Can you thumbs down what people say?
There you go.
Jim,
just turn off your mic, Jim.
You're not funny, and I'm glad I can finally tell you outside of a meeting.
Yeah. I choose to ignore you, Jim. Write me up with HR.
I'll tell you more when I go on the offsite, which is what I think is the best. I think getting
Offsites.
people in a room together for the brainstorm, it does wonders. I've done 2 recently with 2 different departments, in Sonder, and the relationships that get built and the kind of the leaps in confidence, within the team that gets built during those short 3 days is you can't substitute it.
Where are you planning them? Like, where have you held them?
We did one in San Fran, and we did the recent one in Phoenix.
And so both of those are cities, but were they like like a kind of a relaxing scene, or was it more like what was the venue?
First one was a WeWork.
Okay.
So we went around the WeWorks. And it's very much, during the day, meeting room in a WeWork, like a big boardroom. And the San Francisco one was in the Salesforce Tower. So it was more, I think it was impressing the team about the great view as well. You feel very nice and important. But then, in the evening, really where the relationships are built are at, over the dinner table. Right. So a lot of those kind of ad hoc brainstorm sessions. And then for Phoenix, it was much more casual. We have a building where we have all the units on a floor because we're in the accommodation business for those who don't know Sonder. And as part of that whole residential building, there is a recreational space, a big, very nicely decorated with pool table, table tennis, big TV for watching games, and a bar. We did a whole offsite there. No meeting rooms, nothing. Couches, and just throwing ideas out there, having people who will invigilate the conversation and lead it. But between the two, one was maybe a little bit more productive if you looked at like written output. But the second one was a little better because that was a multi-team offsite as well. So if I think about what that offsite achieved in a casual environment, that was the best. And
this is what we're hearing, right? And StartWell. Okay, so let's. I'll give you. Yeah, we'll do a little show and tell here. I mean, we already are, but because StartWell started right in 2017, as we were saying before, off camera. StartWell. I founded StartWell as a co-working space, and the idea was I had just spent some time surveying the Canadian innovation landscape. for work and for kind of pleasure, I helped a bunch of like family offices place money in early stage ventures. And that was at the same time. And then after, spending a year really at SoftLayer running their startup program for Canada. And that was a cloud infrastructure company that was bought by IBM. So through the M&A, I went over to IBM and ran essentially IBM's startup program across Canada, fledgling as it was, under-resourced as it was, under-intended as it was. And there's a lot of lessons from seeing this whole corporate machine trying to trip over its feet to be relevant that I have to share. But
underintended is a interesting word. I'd love to hear more about that later.
Yeah, here's the thing, right? This is 2000 and what year was that? 2014, 15? That I was with SoftLayer and then IBM. The thing that I found was IBM for so long at that point had been growing through acquisition, staying relevant through acquisition. I don't mean there are great research teams all over the world, right? Great innovation teams that are in back offices kind of tinkering on technological innovation, product testing and wonderful stuff. Even their design group, in Toronto, there was an office that was an interface design company. I don't know why they have one, IBM, to compete with all these other agile firms for corporate clients to design products, but they have one, and they were great people there. And so what I was trying to do with the startup program is say, okay, let me reach into all these amazing pockets of talent at IBM and pull out, if nothing else, hours for consulting that we can donate to early stage ventures, and just do office hours, if nothing else. So they can kind of get a look behind the scenes at how a big corporation works, but also as a corporate partner, explore how their solutions could benefit IBM by getting actual feedback from IBM employees. And then, of course, any other insights from the knowledge pool. So very simple, most companies do this kind of stuff for their startup programs, not really a kind of game changer.
Yeah.
But the fear that I faced in the organization, some of it was very stupid. Some of it was very banal, where you had team leads being writing me angry emails. I don't know who you report to. I can't see you in the whatever their org chart kind of software is. And I'm just wondering why you're reaching out to my guys and who's going to pay for their time. I was like, really? Are you micromanaging your team so that they have to clock in and clock out every hour on each project? Otherwise, you can't pay them. But that's the way they were set up. And so people were out for my hide from day one when I was at IBM because I was challenging the status quo of how they worked internally. And classically, IBM's multiple teams, didn't really talk to each other. So IBM, let's say some whatever product, gets evolved and brought to market, it might not be designed by IBM's interface design team. IBM is many, many companies in a sense. And of course, they've been surviving on buying innovation for so long, where they're acquiring companies to buy markets a lot of the time. So in tech, they buy companies like crazy, but most of them are either acqui-hires or really to just kill competition. So this is what happened with SoftLayer. SoftLayer was a kick-ass cloud infrastructure company. One of the few cloud infrastructure companies that was built to scale, and that was literally their tagline, built to scale. It's funny. It's burnt into my brain. But such a cool company because down to even the wires and the placement of the wires in the server stacks, everything was designed. Which sounds like it makes sense now that we know Amazon and Google and all these crazy server, technologies that they've deployed and created to keep costs down, but also to, scale across the world.
Yeah, the hosting capabilities, crazy. Yeah.
So SoftLayer was one of the first. SoftLayer used to be called The Planet. So some people, old school, tech geeks know The Planet. I had come across it years and years ago because for my radio station that was streaming online for my record label called Indian Electronica, I had done some procurement years and years ago, looking we're talking 2003, looking for a streaming service or otherwise a server, virtual server, that didn't have bandwidth caps. This is just like a little interesting thing. You couldn't find one anywhere. Like someone that had global relevance, fast kind of connectivity to their data centers that would give you enough kind of dedicated resources on a shared server that your stream would never like, under buffer or go down. And the Planet had unlimited bandwidth. So it was really big with like streamers early on. And it was a big host for hackers and all sorts of people doing crazy stuff. And they were Texas based. So they had that kind of like cultural flair to say, yeah, whatever. Like they were really cavalier in a way.
Yeah. Austin, Texas?
Dallas.
Dallas.
Yeah. Based in Dallas. And then what happened with SoftLayer was, so they're kind of like architecture was so tight that it was their API. They were the first cloud infrastructure company, I think, that I came across that had an API. This is before Rackspace announced their API. But their API had like 1,400 calls on it when they released it. Like it was so overdeveloped, but it was powerful where you could do an API call to provision hard, like bare metal servers. So I could deploy a brand new server remotely using API calls, where a robot would literally put like machinery together and kind of build out a server.
Oh.
So really, really deep tech in evolving how cloud servers really come together and work. Interesting company because of that. But what happened was there was infighting with the owners, and essentially what happened is they kind of reached a market cap in North America. And from what I remember, their kind of like annual revenue was like $450 million or something. And they couldn't grow because of competition. Amazon at the time was just coming up in cloud hosting. Like it was really a new competitor, and SoftLayer didn't want to buy competitors to gain market share. And so they had to look globally. And they started opening a few data centers here and there. They opened, I think at the time, one in Toronto and a couple others. And the problem was that the founders they're Texans. They drive around with like handguns in their glove compartments. Like no joke, I've seen this. They didn't want to go to like Dubai and open a data center. They didn't want to get into Africa, but the business needed to stay relevant. So essentially that company went on the chopping block. Meanwhile, IBM was up for tender on a couple of Pentagon contracts and Department of Forestry and stuff contracts.
Scales is just crazy.
But what's crazy is that IBM didn't even have a cloud infrastructure to even bid on that tender. So they were shopping all over the world for a cloud vendor because IBM, in its infinite lack of wisdom, was selling as a cloud solution. They would sell on-prem, multi-location. So they were selling this thing that they would call like private cloud, where they'd go into like General Mills and like at all of their factories or whatever, put in like some clunky, massive server rack infrastructure, and then try and get like dark fiber or whatever connectivity point to point and network them and call that like a cloud.
What?
It's kind of like how shitty SaaS companies will, say that they're cloud-based and they're SaaS by having virtual server instances with a full software stack installed on top of it. And every time a new customer signs up through the front end, it provisions a version of that software. This is like old school, like fake it till you make it tech that's like bound to break.
The accounting on that must have been hilarious. You got all these different locations and.
Well, they would, because they were an on-prem business. Like their server, that's the history of the company, right? Is like all this clunky on-prem stuff, and so they would sell like a server for $2 million or something. And so if they could sell a cloud contract to a corporate client, that cloud contract is the opposite of what the cloud actually gives the client in the real world, which is scale at affordable cost. They would instead have like a $20 million contract to do a private cloud. So anyway, what happened was they essentially bought SoftLayer for like a 2x ARR, like really got it cheap. And because all the founders at this point were tired of each other or whatever, the owners. And they bought this company and then they started skinning it, and it's interesting because that one sale paid for the whole company. And then because it was built to scale, it became IBM's, secret weapon for cloud. Now they had a cloud they could deploy all over the world. And so they grew it.
Interesting.
Anyway, I don't know why I brought that up. Oh, we were talking about this whole...
Well, maybe it was about acquisitions and like the follow through on it. I thought it was going to go to somewhere where it was about integrating the team in as well. Expedia is a company that grew by acquisition. Okay, tell me.
Well, yeah, I'll close this loop. I think what it was I was talking about being at IBM as a precursor to Start. Huh?
Yeah,
StartWell?
underintended.
Underintended. Oh, right. Oh, I don't know. There's a lot to just, I don't want to just like throw shit around, but like, basically I found so I actually, was working for SoftLayer because of the company that it was, and then joined, not begrudgingly, like opportunistically joined IBM through the M&A thinking, great, now there's a lot more, leverage to create awesome. And I found at every turn that essentially IBM had no intent whatsoever to engage with what it saw was a threat to its sales. IBM collectively, culturally saw, like the blue blazer culture, saw startups as cannibalistic to sales opportunities, to the point where my program rostered startups to give them free cloud credits. Mm-hmm. I would have cloud salespeople, again, who were selling on-prem crap, like they didn't understand the cloud credits that we gave them. They would start data mining through some back-end whatever contact, or otherwise ask me for the contacts for my customers, and start calling these startups and selling them multi-million-dollar contracts. And the startups would call me and be like, "We don't have this money. What's happening?" They're like, "No, so they got very confused about like what a freemium is and what the upgrade path is. Funnily enough, one of the companies that was on our roster was a Toronto company whose brand is now so famous. They were a kind of they were using like AI for really for like deep science research stuff, and they had a brilliant name that Facebook wanted to acquire. Yeah. And they were called Meta.
No way.
So I knew the guys at Meta, and it was an actual company. And I actually like gave them an extra $1 million of cloud credits or something to keep them alive. They were basically their servers were too expensive, and they hadn't raised enough money yet. And we kept them alive. And then one of the consequences of that down the road was that they sold their brand and their company to Facebook.
Oh.
So that's just one example, one anecdote of the success of this program. But IBM didn't have that foresight,
Imagine guys held on to that. Yeah. Like, took it in a little bit, closer to you.
Right.
To itself and, But you would need that atmosphere of innovation, right? You would want to dabble in that space if you really want it to become what it is now, like this metaverse idea.
Like where IBM, historically has bought companies to kill them to try and be the biggest dog in the market and sell a shitty solution to, an unaware, customer. I think they could have flipped the script and instead, again, it would be a different company, but like, look for innovation everywhere that it exists and be the platform to support it. Then again, then they would be like Google, right? Yeah. Very different companies.
Very different. Yeah.
So, anyway.
Yeah, you have that, in our side, like the travel industry, I was going to say Expedia is a company that grew through acquisition. And the follow-through on integration wasn't always ideal. The M&A guys kind of sign a deal, and then next thing you realize when you really get down to into the weeds, your databases don't sync.
Right.
So not exactly a perfect example. I wasn't part of it, so I can't speak too much to like the nitty-gritty details, but they acquired a company called HomeAware and Verbo, which everybody knows. And
VRBO?
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, so we call it Verbo. And it was their foray into vacation rentals, right? Everyone's like, whoa, Expedia's in. One acquisition. Couldn't get the inventory. Like, couldn't get it to connect. And meanwhile, if you look
So you mean the VRBO listings couldn't get pushed onto Expedia.com or .ca?
a lot of duplicate listings, nobody was really communicating it, maybe, how the integration was going to work. And if you look at how the structure of the company works is at the time, Expedia, you have the people who go and acquire the listing. So if you were a vacation rental or you're a hotel, you would have to agree to come onto our website, but we're just a marketplace.
Right.
So when they went and got this vacation rental, supply to come on, it was supposed to complement the existing hotel supply.
Yeah.
Whereas Booking.com did it all organically. They were hiring teams, going mom and pop, like door to door, mom and pop, signing everybody, like signing your apartment.
Hi, bed and breakfast.
Yeah. Look, we've got this cool app. We've got this website. Booking.com. Great. Yeah, come on. And then on one marketplace, you had everything, like the Marriott down to Kasem's bedroom, right?
Yeah.
In theory, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, Expedia went and did these kind of acquisitions where the integration didn't work out. And it was a really good example of not only did the tech not work out, but then you had this whole team that was sitting there, and they were an innovative team. Or when they acquired Hotwire, which is a last-minute booking platform.
I remember using that, yeah.
They were known to be the fun team. They had go-kart races in the office and things like that. And when you get down to, okay, maybe the business revenue starts coming in, and you can share inventory, but over time, if you're the people working in that company, you kind of looked at it and said, my job is about to disappear, or my fun time is going to go. It's going to go. And it stifles innovation in a lot of places. Or at least the people who have the choice are usually the most mobile. They drop off like flies if they don't become like a senior leader or something like that. And I think that now you see a lot of the startups, starting to do that, like posturing up to get acquired and things like that. You have that problem of the churn, right, of talent.
Yeah, churn is a big one. And actually, it's something that's been recurring in this series so far, is talking about, especially precipitated by the last couple of years. Maybe it's some people have told us that it might be a generational thing. It might be a kind of a culture of work thing inherited by people coming out of, at least in Canada, the work-study programs, where you're spending a short amount of time as, the end of your engineering degree or something at a company for 6 months and then going to another one. And that just becomes the culture where like people are looking for new experiences, new projects to tackle, especially engineers that are, very high grade or very solutions oriented. They want to tackle, climb the mountain and then go on to the next mountain. So they're looking for challenges, and that's what a job is at a company. And so they don't mind if they have 50 companies that, when they're 50 years old to look back on, that form their career, their CV.
Yeah. Well, but I feel like we did. Sorry.
Yeah, no, go for it.
I feel like sometimes we maybe look at it as age is one thing, but nobody has. You don't hear very often where they talk about, you have these companies that service and want to instill this mobility in the workforce, like LinkedIn and things like that. It's a lot less painful to do so. And it's romanticized to have a globalized world.
Oh, yeah.
So, like, if you were to say, yeah, it could be age, but isn't it a function of the fact that with the rise of startups and the internet, they wanted to make it easy to move, because we talk about how valuable talent is if he's been at 3 companies. Startups want institutional people who've worked in large institutions.
Yeah, that's a whole fucked up thing to me. Like this idea of kind of, why is it a badge of honor to say you're like ex-Facebook? Well, maybe you sucked. Maybe Facebook itself sucks. Like maybe your team never did anything at Facebook, but somehow it's like desirable.
But you could turn it around too, right?
Yeah.
Like you worked at a startup, great. It basically means you'd work the weirdest hours. You never had to do time management because you're working 9 to 9 every day.
Well, this is the thing, is that like, it's interesting, right? We're talking to a lot of HR people that are either internal or external, recruiters or talent, acquisition folks as part of this series. And I think what they're the strongest kind of theme in how they find good people is really network and network effects, not so much like resumes. Mm-hmm. But that's also another whole topic that's analytical one is to look at kind of the increasing relevance of LinkedIn in the last few years as a social network as opposed to as a place to like create a CV without typing it up.
Yeah.
And there's a kind of a social behavior emerging that's like on that network where people are like, yes, posting jobs, yes, answering job listings, applying for jobs, but also kind of using their profile as more than a resume, right? And the LinkedIn profile. I mean, this is the interesting thing. We've kind of assumed this, right? So also I have a little tin hat thing to say about this, which is kind of cool. You know, I don't know if you remember this, right? Not many people kind of actually that I've talked to remember this moment, but sometime, I believe it was in 2020, like towards the end of the year, Facebook pushed a UI update for their web interface.
Okay.
The look of Facebook changed.
Yeah.
And overnight, within 2 weeks, LinkedIn used the old Facebook layout. The river of news that you're so familiar with now, because it's been only like a couple of years, but we're all on LinkedIn all the time.
Mm-hmm.
LinkedIn kind of took the old Facebook interface as soon as the old one was discarded. And it became popular for people disenfranchised from Facebook. Like LinkedIn became the new Facebook for professionals.
I was going to say that the posts aren't always professionally driven.
Yeah.
There's a lot more emotions being put into the post. And I think that puts employers and managers in a tough spot sometimes.
Because everyone is a representative of their employer on that platform or elsewhere. And yet they're it's a social network, so you want to kind of like express yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, so it's very interesting because employees might be speaking in a non-representative way, but more importantly to me is that companies are missing cues on those posts for celebrating employees and encouraging them. You know, there's a lot of talent that's being restricted by not being facilitated as kind of brand mouthpieces.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's a lot of opportunity as well through LinkedIn in this way. But coming back to the story of like, you know, the rapid cycling, churn, attrition amongst teams. And part of it is, yes, like workers looking for things that they can't have at their company, whatever that is, right? So mobility is one of the top desirables. During the pandemic, a lot of young folks who were not, you know, with child and mortgage said, I want to go to Tulum. Like, I want to, you know, I want to live by Cancun. I want to like get a Beetle, a Volkswagen, and like, you know, live my mom's 1970s dreams.
I don't know.
In her jeans. What's up with the mom jeans, people? Let's end that.
I'm not a fan.
Let's end that. Anyone grew up in the 80s knows it was never cool.
Tight in some places and then loose. And then that's what jeans are. They just change where it gets tight.
Yeah.
Right? They just flows.
Every season, different styles.
On the mobility and Tulum, I think it was The Economist that they did a piece on economic refugees from the U.S. to Mexico. Maybe you've read something along that line.
Nope.
So it's talking about during this work remote, a lot of Americans, particularly from those very expensive states, you know, California and places like that, they had very good salaries, but barely able to survive. You know, then you go to somewhere like Mexico because you live like a king.
Yeah.
However, what ended up happening is they now dominate. They're the big spenders in Mexico City,
so they're causing inflation.
Yeah, and then over time, they're squeezing out local culture establishments. Mm-hmm. So restaurants and things like that start getting kicked out, and they're getting replaced by coffee shops.
I'll say this even specifically about Tulum, man. I went to Tulum for the first time in 1999, and that's when Tulum was Tulum. Like, for me, it felt like... it kind of felt like Lamu, or it felt like Zanzibar a little bit. Mm-hmm. You know, there was a local kind of culture. There was definitely like a legacy culture of hippies and some yoga places. But for the most part, it was about pristine beach, quiet, and you go there to be by yourself on the beach. And just, it was not like a hotel experience in that or it was not, how do I express this properly? It was that kind of like desert island beach holiday as opposed to the all you can eat buffet beach holiday. And in a country that has promoted tourism as mass tourism, where this all inclusive hotel experience has been so predominant, especially up the coast to Cancun, Tulum was the counterbalance. What's really funny is that there's this cultural inflection now, where like the boho chic aesthetic is being flipped on its head as a marketing tool by local developers, and hoteliers. And it's kind of like the people who are discovering Tulum now feel like they've discovered something that is new, and it's not at all, and it's definitely not what it was 20 years ago.
No.
So it's kind of funny. But anyway, the point is, people that belong to working teams who want to use their job to buy some sort of lifestyle freedom,
Mm-hmm.
all the kudos to them for sure for trying to find a better place to live and still be able to commit dedication to their jobs, and all the kudos to the employers trying to manage this distribution. But it's tough. Like Mexico's an interesting one for us because it's within time zone approximately. Yeah. But if I wanted to move to, well, not me, I work for myself, but if someone wants to move to Prague and their local team is here, that's a tough one.
I've heard many examples like this. Yeah, especially if you have a role where the hours matter, slightly operational in tech, like you need to be on those calls for product calls and things like that. It's a huge problem. And those roles are sometimes the most important, because the moment you start getting churn in tech, in your tech teams who own products, one person leaves, all that workload goes to the next, and then all of a sudden 4 engineers turn into 1.
Right.
And then what do? Do you pay that 1 engineer the salary of 4? Or do you try back hire as quickly as possible, and then culture fit, everything comes in, right? It's a bit of a slippery slope. I think that what you're saying is getting on the ball quicker. That first person, that goes out the door needs a lot of critical reflection.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I think engineer jobs and things like that also happen to be some of the highest paying jobs in a organization. And so it's seen almost like a lifting of a burden at first, like, oh, it's one less salary to be paid. But what that ends up doing in your quarterly planning or your biennial planning, it snowballs into huge problems later on. And I don't have a very good answer for it, other than from my experience, I think it actually pays to still have some rigid rules. This problem of like, do we want to let people go to Prague? I would say to myself, no, I wouldn't necessarily want to work with someone that's halfway across the world. A lot of people will come out and they write very good speeches but it's about the flexibility, it's about making it work if they're really, but there is a part of that which is, well, once they're in Prague, right?
Other opportunities will present themselves. Their lives are going to be, evolving.
So you might lose them in the end. And this is hard to say, because one day maybe I want to do the same thing, but I should be understanding if my team or my company says no.
I think it comes down to culture. Like a lot of organizations aren't reassessing what the cultural values they hold are, in terms of either enabling distributed work by understanding what the fallbacks are for those workers, like what are the absolute essentials in terms of like participatory culture and adherence also to expectations that are functional and otherwise, like communication between team members and stuff, and developing relationships. If they can't create a software-led plan to facilitate this stuff, they don't necessarily have to. Like, there are a lot of companies that require local culture for their success, and for teams to be together physically. Like, look at my business, right? So it's really interesting because we support tech companies and a lot of innovation-based companies, a lot of Fortune 50 companies too. Like, all sorts of companies come through our doors to use StartWell, as essentially an offsite or a meeting destination, aside from our media production stuff. And there's two things to that. One is we all need to be here to support these people. Like my employees at StartWell, my team, are tied to a physical property. We're not going it. We can't do our job in Mexico, you know. And yet the teams that we support, we have suitcases all over the place. People are flying in from all over the place. And what's really interesting about that is, on one hand, you could say, you know, my team looks at those people and says, oh, I wish I had that life. But then at the other side, they're all coming here.
Yep.
All of these teams are reporting back from the field to us saying, we wish this place existed wherever we live or otherwise. If we had known about this place, you know, this should be our everyday experience.
I've seen it in my company and other companies. Everybody wants remote work, and then 6 months into it, I want a WeWork membership. I want a co-working space membership.
Yeah.
And now it's just to go and socialize with the people outside of your company.
And that is like such a huge thing. So we're seeing it with all the offsites that we're facilitating, whether it's for small teams or large teams, that like using the coming together when it needs to happen for literally the base expectation of re-socializing people to know each other, to be comfortable with each other, to be familiar with each other. That's like the number one thing that organizations need to rely on evolving their culture. Because if the people don't know each other, it's very difficult to not just know what your culture is, but to rely on it. People need to be able to figure out how they relate to each other. And again, if everyone's behind a screen, it's not necessarily going to happen, you know. Yeah. So we see that every day, and we hear it in the laughter, and like that, the vibe that people have when they come to StartWell is so it's infectious and it's positive and it's good vibes. Yeah.
So how do you look at your competitive landscape? Like, how do you break out your competitors and by brands? What are the things that you say bucket them into other ones? Price?
I don't like to think competitively, but what I would say is that in 2017, when StartWell was founded, you know, we were specifically a co-working space for early stage ventures, particularly tech companies. Then things changed. A couple of years in, you know, we kind of, actually since day one, I've always held something that set me outside of competing, which seemed to be stupidity, is what I was called by, you know, competitors that I know in the space. So other co-working operators really were looking at unit economics as their business model. We need to get the tiniest glass cubicle offices to fill the most people in, to make the most money with the least amount of common space per square foot, to maximize, you know, that turn of profit on a real estate asset. That's basically what, you know, that's the WeWork thing, right? Common space, if anything, is show value programming. So make the space next to the elevators where you can't put an office kind of feel like it's your living room, but then, hey, wait, you're sitting there and people are walking behind you and your back is kind of, your neck hairs are out tingling, you know, because it's not comfortable.
That's a good point. Yep.
So, you know, there's a lot of things that I'll throw stones at WeWork for, and their design folks for productizing what I call a Holiday Inn Express experience. You know, it's certainly not a St. Regis, certainly not a Four Seasons, and it's not even a W, you know. So it thinks it's a W, or at least that was the Adam Newman perception, was that like WeWork is a W hotel, you know. It's a little like low key maybe on the staff on the floor, but like everyone gets a hamburger when they want one, but the hamburger feels like it's something new. And there's like fluorescent color everywhere and motivational, you know, speeches everywhere. So like people aren't alone because they're reminded that like Gandhi, you know, lived, some bullshit like that. But yeah,
WeWork as a W is probably one of the least raucous statements he made about the brand.
But like, I think the thing is that like, you know, seeing the workplace facilitated by WeWork as something fun and new and refreshing was kind of like the shtick for WeWork in the early years. And anyway, the business model, despite that, was very much that you put people as densely as possible in glass cubicles. charge a premium price, maybe give them a bit of lease flexibility. But the convention at the time, right, was a 10-year lease versus maybe a 2-year lease. So the 8-year delta is a lot of value, right? However, what we always found was competitively, I was like, fuck that. I don't want anyone to feel like a sardine in their office. And I want offices to feel like bedrooms in a hotel. You come down from your office. So even our layout at StartWell, the upper floors are offices. And then the lower floors are meeting spaces, lounges. And then even at our reception, we don't have self-service kitchens. There's a couple kitchenettes here and there for people like reheat their lunch. But you walk in a StartWell and there's a barista who's, on a wicked old school restored Gaggia, espresso machine that you saw, and they're offering you a cappuccino. And then we also have tech, like we've got like a robot that brews loose leaf teas on demand, which is kind of cool, called a T-Bot. So we mix that self-service and full service, low staff footprint, but it's, I hate saying it this way, in commercial real estate, people will say, it's a hospitality focused offering. But yeah, so in the early days, that hospitality set us apart. And I had probably about 50% of my square footage being common and shared space, as opposed to what is typically about 15% maybe, 15-18% in conventional co-working. And I'll say that that's not even co-working. Companies like WeWork, IWG, Regus, etc. Regus's affiliate brands under IWG, including Spaces.
Yeah.
Those are essentially shared office companies. That's the way I look at it. They're commingled offices. They're not co-working in terms of the ethos of co-working not being there, which is more of an indie vibe in the early days. Kind of like around the time WeWork got started, but like co-working from when I discovered it at the Center for Social Innovation in like 2006, the first spaces in Canada at the time, were emerging. And the culture was very much about what is the experience of people relying on each other, working together from different organizations. Like literally, what is that culture when you've got 50 companies represented in the same space by kind of like a team that might be like 1 or 2 or 5 people from each company. But they're all sharing the same space, eating lunch together on certain days, having parties together. So the ethos of co-working in the early days was very much about like people together from different backgrounds, which is really cool. But then in the commercialization of co-working, what happened was there was an over-focus on the business model, which relies on term commitments, cash deposits, corporate clients. So the space and the design of that space to be colorful and animated was to kind of make the employees of these corporate companies feel like they're in a different place and they're enjoying life more. That's the way I look at it. And you see it with brands like Spaces by IWG. Spaces was supposed to be their fun brand to counterbalance their boring 1980s pocket square bullshit of Regus, right? And the design follows suit, and everyone's got the same aesthetic language, from a corporate offering of co-working where they're all copying each other, and it's like designs that they're not context sensitive.
Do you think it's old design though, or there are certain brands where they toot their community managers, so instilling relationships through humans?
I get it, but at the same time, I haven't seen a brand that particularly like let's call it a 20 site plus brand in co-working that in especially the Western Hemisphere, in North America particularly, that enables those community managers to actually understand human dynamics and participate amongst those people in a non-bellhoppy way. For the most part, community managers in these like corporatized co-working spaces are glorified bellhops. That's the way I look at it. Like they're going to help you with the printer when you have problems with the printer, and then they'll be like hanging out with you and maybe go for a drink with you once in a while, right? They'll be your buddy, but how do they have relevance in your company's functioning? Are they offering opportunity for your company to grow, find partnerships, find, staff if you're hiring? No. Are they, responsible for even doing the extra mile and being a concierge and getting you an Uber when you need it? Typically not.
No.
What happens is it's very difficult to have that role not fuck shit up. So the responsibility profile goes way down.
Yeah.
Those people are there to kind of like hang out. In the WeWork model, traditionally, it was like they're people that are just hanging out, right?
Yeah.
And they're animating. If anything, I mean, they're animating the space, which means, yay, like it's going to be donut hour in an hour. So
Bagel Thursdays.
I'll go tell everyone, yeah, come get your bagels. Yay, we're going to have bagels together, guys. So there's maybe a time and a place for that in certain cultures. But what we've always found is that, like, I want my customer base to be entirely created of people who know what they do every day. I don't want entrepreneurs. I don't want people trying to figure out their life through their work.
Okay.
And that's a huge cultural difference that from day one we've always found with these kind of like shared office places. It's a flip, where people come to StartWell not to try and find validation.
Okay.
They are pre-validated. They've got their whole next 5 years of their work cut out for them. So in sharing space at StartWell, they are really here to enjoy being able to focus, being able to collaborate, being able to do their work. That's really like the meta. It's not a sideline. This is not a carnival where people come to like forget that they're employees. Which I think got baked into the aesthetics under Adam Newman at WeWork, and subsequently with the kind of, I could do a kind of interior design critique episode where I'm like looking at different photographs of all these different operators and say, this is why that's stupid and this is stupid. A lot of it is not, I guess a lot of it is not context sensitive. Like I've seen this where, they're trying to, just like on the data center example, large footprint, multi-locational brands are trying to roll out this franchise approach that doesn't enable teams in particular locations to enjoy a space that was built for them. It was designed, in Tallahassee for them. And so there's a disparity between expectations of experience and the actual experience.
Yeah, and then balancing the budget, anyways, at some point, like on what they can actually install.
But a lot of money gets spent for these top-down, design initiatives and centralized stuff. Like this, coming full circle to hospitality, the same things in hotels, right? Like if you look at major logo efforts at creating ubiquitous brand experience versus boutique hotels that are multi-locational, that are very site-specific, they're like night and day. They're different things.
Yeah. For a long time in the hospitality industry, the lifestyle was that word, right? And then W was seen as the leader, and now it's just more extreme versions that are like really.
But even
localized.
Then, roll it back a few years. Why is W considered to be a leader? Where's Ian Traeger these days? Like seriously. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like Ian Traeger was the boss because he was fucking shit up. And it was about the quality of experience in an Ian Traeger hotel when you walk in the door is one of, mirth, excitement, curiosity, and every stay is an opportunity to discover.
But you have that cycle as well, like that, and then everybody tries to copy it, and then someone democratizes it. Like,
by democratize it, you mean franchises it?
No, by making it cheaper.
Yeah.
Like, okay, same thing. Now we just go to a 4-star version of it. Oh, this public co-working space, it's got that. Okay, now let's make a more democratized, like, again, cheaper version of it so it's more accessible.
The funny thing is, though, I mean, like, and this is the Ian Traeger example is really interesting because, he's all about affordable luxury, right? And I think his public hotels brand was the last kind of brand that was active, or the most recent thing. But the idea of affordable luxury is such that it should be affordable, like luxury, unless you're talking about jewelry and then you don't want it to fall apart. But my take on things is that for quality hospitality experiences, you don't need to pay a lot, and the vendor doesn't need to spend a lot to provide exceptional service. It's actually a corrosion of the model, such that, operators feel like, a better, like, as a chef, I want the best quality meat, if I'm going to cook you a steak, for sure. But I need to know how to cook that steak.
Yeah.
And I could give you a smaller portion of a fantastically, like, hand massage grass-fed steak that you're going to love because of the other things on the plate as well. I don't need to give you like an 800-gram steak for $200. I could give you the same quality of meat with sides and everything else, right? In a way that doesn't break my bank on the supply side, that gives you tons of value. In fact, more value than eating more of that ingredient. So the way I look at it is like, affordable luxury is a powerful thing so long as the operator understands what the concept is.
Yeah. But in hospitality industry, pricing is dynamic. So when we say affordable, like, what is that point? Like, is that revenue management department really going to set an upper bound?
What it comes down to is that, and we were talking about scale startups and stuff. I think profit margin is an interesting thing to consider, because most public companies are entirely focused on profit maximization. Now, if instead you had a mandate to ensure minimum profit margin and locked in at that, so you're not an infinite scale company. You're not saying, in a great market, we can make 5 times what we're making now. No, you say, I don't give a fuck if it's a great market. I only want to make 1 time what I'm making now. So if I want to make more money, I got to grow. I got to have more locations. We got to offer different products to the same customer, maybe increase the value of the customer to us in different ways.
Yeah.
But why should I try and make more and more and more and more and more and more and more money? Because the product has to suffer eventually. It's not sustainable.
Yeah. I guess when you're modeling that out, though, the risk factor is really high and just subjective to whoever's running it, right?
Yeah, except it's bullshit. When any organization says that we're going to mitigate kind of the risk of non-constant, let's call it input costs, by charging as much as we can when we can, they don't have any conception of what cash flow means. Because you're not holding that like extra winnings in your pocket for a bad market.
No, you're deploying it usually so that you can go and,
Ultimately, you're just levering it. It's always about leverage. So you make them more money, you can borrow more, or whatever it is that you need to do. So it's kind of risky, and the way I look at it is this is maybe a kind of like the owner-operator versus the infinite scale, public company perspective. But I really do value an interplay between affordable luxury and controlled profit expectations. Part of that, of course, is knowing your costs and trying to keep them constant. It's tough in an inflationary kind of context, and like everyone in Europe, dealing with this with energy as well right now. So there's things that are out of your hand, but ultimately you'd want to provide a high level of standard at a constantly great price to somebody to make it, what did you call it? Democratization, to truly democratize, what you're offering.
Yeah. I mean, some companies say that, Yeah. Whether it's true or not, like I said, dynamic pricing tends to throw that out the window the moment, people see a crunch time on, no more availability in the market. You look at hotel rates and how they fluctuate, it's crazy. I look at the Toronto market on like hotel prices. People said that, we had a really tough season through COVID. But I look at some of the hotels and the prices they're charging, and I'm really wondering to myself, who's paying that in some cases to stay?
It's crazy. I mean, definitely we have an undersupply of beds in this city, and then so that's a natural kind of inflationary pressure. But yeah, the way that people price things for hotels is really weird. It's very weird.
Yeah, but my point here is, it's surprising to me that we
that
know
people
the
would
reason
pay.
why it goes, but why would you pay?
No, but it's crazy. I mean, but yeah, I know, and that's a dead end kind of logic in a constrained market where demand just way outstrips supply, because you see it even in the non-traditional market. You look at Airbnbs in this city; they're terrible. right?
Yeah.
Across the board, like the product is horrible.
Mm.
Most of them are in condo buildings where it's illegal to even have those Airbnbs. And there's literally signs. I once booked my parents before they moved back to Canada recently. I booked them in an Airbnb. It looked legitimate from the listing. The reviews were exceptionally great. Again, who's reviewing this thing? I don't know. They're people from podunk towns that are like, in the big city. Maybe they're not looking at the same things I'm looking at. But what I found was my parents called me as soon as they checked in, and they were like,
What is going on?
we got the key from a lockbox outside of the building that's in a place with all these other lockboxes, and there's a big sign that says, not for Airbnb usage. And then we went in the building, and above the concierge or like security guard next to the elevators, there was a sign that said, you will be prosecuted if you are staying in an Airbnb. And then we came up to the place, and the place looks fairly clean, but it doesn't look like they've cleaned the towels properly.
Huh?
And also, we're afraid we're going to get arrested sitting here. Like, they're not going to sleep comfortably in this place,
Mm-hmm.
And then I wrote to the chap whose place it was, supposedly. It turns out he's not. He's a broker doing a side hustle, helping his friend make money on a property he couldn't sell.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what this was. And he was not receptive to feedback. And I was like, look, dude, this is illegal what you're doing. It's literally illegal. If I had known, I would have paid, because I think I was paying like $600 a night or something. Like, yeah, it's like, I'll put them in a really nice hotel room.
Yeah.
Why am I suffering this way?
Mm-hmm.
Like, do you understand that you're overselling me something crap?
Yeah.
And he was like, oh, I'll knock off 50% off the last night. They were staying there for like 4 nights. So the experience was horrible.
Yeah.
And it's not just that experience that I say the stock is poor. Like, when I look at Airbnb versus hotels in Toronto, downtown Toronto, there's no way I would choose an Airbnb because very few are exceptional properties. And when I stay anywhere that's not my house, I'm rare, but I hold that place to the standard of my house.
Yeah.
I live well, I always have. Like, even if it was a crappy little apartment, it was awesome. And I don't know that if the mass population who checks in at Airbnbs does in North America, right? This is not like a castle in France. I don't think people really understand that. And also, those might be people that are talking about democratization, where markets are cheaper. People staying in other people's apartments might not otherwise spring for a hotel.
No.
Maybe it's cheaper in some places. But yeah, then you have these weird things like in Toronto where it doesn't make any sense. We need more hotel rooms. Construction costs are difficult. People would rather put up condo buildings because they'll make their winnings.
That too.
As the developer profile is very difficult for hotels in Toronto.
Yeah.
But we are seeing a number of properties being redeveloped into mixed use because of low office utilization.
Yeah. Yeah. And when I was doing feasibility in the Middle East, that's when serviced apartments was really the boom. And what it would do to your, the cash flow, we're calculating it. Everybody just wanted to put a couple in there.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, everything's black. It's like, oh, nice. It worked out. And now all of a sudden, it's like, oh, we have all these serviced apartments. They're all luxury. Let's go put some, lower brands in there. And yeah, serviced apartments, this idea of home away from home is very romantic. As it sounds like, you're kind of going back to people who are working for a company. If they travel for a company now with remote work, you might go to a city, and before it was all about work potentially, right? And it would be the local city teams that took you out. It would be your business partners that take you out. Yeah. But now with Airbnb experience, now with service apartments, with vacation rentals and a globalized world where you can have people you studied with in any city in the world, you are maybe less attached to your company just because why would I go see my colleague when I can see my friend? And, it's funny just how all this comes together to just so many headwinds for companies trying to get this integration. Like, oh, travel with the company, we're going to pay for you, etc. But you're going there and living your own life. You're extending through the weekend so you can live your own life. And work is just seen as a enabler to whatever lifestyle you want. Or remote work is so that you can be at home.
It's kind of weird you say it that way because I've definitely seen it a lot recently where I'm looking at a new employee class of kind of people seeing work as a source of revenue.
Yeah.
They're not career track minded.
No.
Like people today, depending on what industry you're in, I'll talk about my lens on startups. Like people in startups who are not necessarily engineers, who are like, want to be at their terminals all the time and just like solve problems. People on the front end of the side of the business in startups, a lot of them literally are just like saying this paycheck is like me having a gig and my client is paying me. So that changes the dynamics on how they relate to their employer. You can't boss me around. You can't push me around. That kind of mentality. This like, I'll fire you. And that's what quitting and going to another job is simply that. And of course, it's a hot topic on this series is people talking about how do you manage that as an employer? You want to engage your peeps, but at the same time, you want them to be loyal because otherwise you've put so much effort into entrusting them with the work. And I think this is a real interesting thing is that a lot of people today, let's call it new employees, aren't necessarily appreciative of the role being created for them. And it goes back to this corruption of maybe like the corporate politic in North America. But so many employees assume that the ability for the company to pay their salary is unquestionable.
Yes.
And anyone in startups will kind of tell you, right, no matter where you get your money, if it's VC or otherwise, that like you've got 10 million uses for each dollar. So if someone is not thankful for the position that they hold, it's very difficult to feel beholden to them in any way. But the staff demand is like, you owe me something because you hired me. It's a really weird, corrupted thing. Not for everybody, but it does seem to happen.
And imagine you've heard a lot of this firsthand from the founders of those startups.
100%, and we've seen it through our tenancy as well. We've seen companies grow from zero to hundreds of plus of people over the last 5 years, and it's something that's come up over and over and over again.
I'm curious, maybe a little bit off topic, but with the cross-pollination that you have in your space between these companies, you ever had
like has someone poached someone else's staff?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
That must be a real catch-22 on, maybe Shannon put you there.
It's weird because I think the early stage founders are not looking at that as a problem as much as like conventional, corporate politic does. Like if someone, it's kind of weird. I'll say it like this. A lot of early stage founders, maybe first-time entrepreneurs particularly, are not as cautious as they should be. They're not as cognizant of the value of human resources as an input into the business. It's really weird. And part of it is if you're in a fundraise cycle, your fundraise is more important than anything, So if leadership is constantly focused on the biggest problem, it's the biggest problem now, which is not the biggest problem over time, which fundamentally is your people. Your people sustain the business's operation. But if you're even like ahead of that, you're not even really in operation because you've been bankrolled to set up shop, you won't appreciate what it means to be able to rely on your people.
Yeah. We made a joke about it before we started this episode of referring to North America using the phrase North America because it sounds like I'm about to say something really judgmental, but I mean that. I mean it now in a very... I'm trying to be objective and ask myself if this is the case of perhaps in North America there is this point of there's this focus on the grind.
Yeah.
Working hard, gotta put in the hours, and that's what determines success in some ways. And I've seen some founders leaders come out and talk about that, but I think in startups it's particularly like that. You have these CEOs and people like that come out and say, it's going to be tough and we're going to get through it. But what it really means is we're about to go and put in some crazy hours in here. And it might be true, but yeah, ultimately, how do they get around that and realize?
Well, look, we've seen something weird in North America. This is the way I look at it. In the last couple of decades, there's two major trends that I see as a little fucked up. One is a new classism. And the other thing is, which might be contextual for this, is secularization. So secularization in the last, let's call it since the 50s, in North America has meant that, the temples are not sacred and that everyone is their own god. And fundamentally, we've had this obscuration of signal sourcing because of it. And you see that online where, iconography of success and the assumed divinity of cultural icons and celebrity culture is obscuring people's subconscious value for, let's call it the ever, looking eye, the watchful gaze of the divine. This is the way I look at things. And secularization is scary as it progresses, because what it does is people entrust systems and kind of totems with signals for their own life, and perhaps this has fueled the appetite in the last couple of generations or generation for the post-baby boomer generation in North America for money as a measure of success. Because you're not going to feel that, conventional fulfillment that you might have had in a more religious society. I'm not saying that as people turn away from the concept of God or have questions they can't answer, and because of that don't go to their church of a familial heritage, that they are lost in any way. I'm just saying that, whether you choose to be religious or not, as the mass population is less religious with every generation, the experience of religiosity, which is, if nothing else, submission to a divine existence, means that humans have less or fewer tools at their disposal to negotiate existential angst, the human condition. So in the last couple decades in North America, what I've seen is that sets the tone for this kind of like value for lucre, value for money above all else, the greed that we see, the ignorance about the fluidity and virtualization of public markets, right? It's basically like using a what do you call it? I don't know. Everyone wants to entrust opportunity with this divinity. Like I see a lot of bets being made that are hopeful bets across all segments of the economy, right? And so this is an interesting thing for me, where I see this kind of like money above all else thing, and then a general celebritized, identity of riches, where like, I don't know, like let's talk about some bullshit that's recent, okay? Kanye West. So Kanye West is an interesting guy, right? For many reasons. A lot of people, historically, whether you agree that his music was great or not, or whether he had one song, or whether he had an album, or whether he had a career in music,
is that up for debate?
Well, like the thing is, yeah. I mean, I'm gonna hate on Kanye. No, I always have though. I've always been like, yeah, cool. That guy can. He has some songs, right? Like, cool. He makes music. That's great. Whatever. But I remember when that song came out, and I was living in New York, and it was kind of like part of the palette. If you're in the scene in New York, if you're part of any music scene, that was a song, Jesus Walks type, all that shit. It was a song, and it was a cool song, but it was like anthemic song. And it was part of the palette. It wasn't everything. And I think what happens with these celebrity icons as musicians or otherwise is they become everything to the people who are their fans, right? And that hope and want to understand the celebrity in a way that's packaged so that they can relate to that person has become endemic in the society, where someone like Kanye West, like there's literally this kind of weird like guilt and what do you call it? It's people feel very much let down by the man ranting and raving about stupid, anti-Semitic bullshit, and it becomes this hot topic in society, right? And all the reported media, there's some sort of like all these catches of money, like everything is told about money. So okay, so this guy goes local, right, and starts like spitting stupidity, and it's cost him $400 million. Adidas is burning money every day that they're talking to Kanye West. Because no one wants to call out the real issue. And fans are feeling like their, icon has let them down. And a lot of the defense you see in public media for him is, well, he knows what he's doing. It's this whole Donald Trump defense. Oh, he's so rich, he must know what he's doing.
Oh.
He did something right. Jesus loves him. Like people will say shit like that.
Yeah.
And you hear it all the time. And
Yeah.
so I see it from the lens of technology because that's very much my world. And I see, all of these iconic folks, people that have become celebritized to nouveau Jesus status, like Steve Jobs. Again, a hot topic person is Elon Musk.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So Elon Musk, there's just so much public opinion about that guy who tweets similarly to Donald Trump. It's just like, what is Twitter anymore? I don't know, man. I was one of the first people on Twitter. I don't use it anymore because it's like I have never felt that you can engage anyone in conversation on Twitter.
Yeah.
But that's part of that whole psychological kind of, let me put something there and see how it reacts as opposed to engage people.
I know a startup that started out in one of the WeWorks I was working out of who they were just a content website and they did a variety in the beginning when I first noticed them, and it was motivational speeches, but then self-help, and then some spirituality content, etc. And as time went on, and they got more funding and things like that. First of all, I looked at that and went, "How are you getting funding? Like, what is the problem you're solving other than entertainment? Kind of, like I thought a content, provider, or a production company would acquire you. Like, no, it was bought as a business. I was like, okay." As time progressed, all of it became motivational. All of it was motivational videos, speeches, get it, make it, do it.
Right.
And
Hustle
it was
culture shit.
all celebrities.
Yeah.
And that was my first year in Canada. And I looked
You're
at
like, what is this?
And it was kind of foreign to me. And I know that it obviously exists in Europe and the Middle East and Africa where I've lived before, but I just felt like it wasn't the same. I didn't get the same, like electrifying feeling, and I mean that in a bad way of like, oh my god, like the guy's an actor, this person's a singer, like they're very skilled, very talented, but you're making this video like they're gonna solve your family problems or your career aspirations, and it's like, go get what you want, always be grinding, you working at night, etc. And I kind of get it when they use maybe not Manny Pacquiao, but like Floyd Mayweather running at 3 a.m. after he went to the club.
Sure.
Like, I kind of get that a little bit more, and maybe that's just a bias because I think, sports, he's a sportsman and stuff. But yeah, this, what you're talking about, secularization of it definitely, in my opinion, bleeds over. I really agree with you because you talk to your colleagues and there it is, I'm going to finish my 9 to 5 and then I'm going to go and do this. And
no, what's crazy is the evolution of this as marketing and as a recruitment tool. Like, again, I'm just saying some things I've seen. I'm not going to question whether it's good or bad, but you see a lot of companies celebrating, tech companies particularly, but celebrating the ability to have a side hustle for employees as a recruitment tool. But at the same time, why is that a side hustle as opposed to part of your hustle?
I was going to say that because I don't think it's bad to have a side hustle, but to call it that,
dude,
packaging of it.
I'm going to say, look, I work hard for my company. I'm an employee just like everyone else here, CEO, owner, or otherwise. When I go home, I want to spend time with my daughter, and after I eat, I have 1 hour before I go to sleep. Before I wake up again at 6:30 in the morning. I don't have time for a side hustle. I'm dedicated to this job, which means during the day, and it's not even I work long hours, it's like 9 till 6, maybe 7. I don't have time during my day to do a side hustle because I'm doing my thing. So if you really break it down, no one has bloody time for a side hustle. They don't. Unless they're wearing their sleep down. They're wearing their weekends down, which might be respite if, from your job, if it's whatever, takes from you during the week. If you need the weekend to rest after a week of work because you're dedicated, you don't want to spend it trying to hustle some money. If you have a passion for something, maybe you don't want to be full-time. You want to be part-time with your job.
But I think that's it, right? A lot of people are
Part-time with their jobs.
but at least
They've
maybe
clocked out.
they suspect they could be passionate. And yeah.
No, I mean, like, look, we're going through a cultural evolution in North America right now where I think distributed work is kind of, which is cool, enabling people to start questioning because their days are less busy or they're busy in different ways. They're not commuting as much. They're not seeing their days as a lot of wasted time. So it's good for people to question these things, but I think ultimately you see, or I'm seeing a lot of people going the route of saying, I will earn my job because it kind of subsidizes my lifestyle and my side hustle is going to push me into the thing that really ultimately I want to be doing. And you're using your job to finance escaping from your job. As someone who has been an entrepreneur since I was, the first business I've never said on camera, but yeah, like 14, let's call it, right? When I was like an internet reseller in the first ever in East Africa, and I was carrying around a bag of modems after school to install and teach people what the internet was in 94, 95. Like, since then, I'll say that, like, yeah, I've been an entrepreneur forever. And if you want to be an entrepreneur, truly, and you have a passion to do something as a business, you can't have a side hustle. The side hustle should be the hustle. So I find it very weird that, like, companies would embrace subsidizing someone's, departure from their employment by promoting this as a benefit. I would instead, as that company, say, it's not a side hustle. I'm going to be an incubator, right? So we'll give you 1 or 2 days a week off your salary, like on salary, I mean, paid for, to create something amazing. We're going to invest in you as a person, but we'll calculate it out. You're part of our incubator program, and we take 5% equity. And we'll connect you with financing if you need it, or whatever resources that the company can assist with. Turn it around. I don't understand why I'm not seeing more companies create these mechanisms for incubating innovation by leveraging their talent pool to create that value. Instead, they're at odds with it and caught in this, like, we don't want them to quit, but they're doing some other shit. And, like, they're just, like, tremoring, and, like, it's there's ways around it, I think.
Yeah. To deal with the necessity of, recognizing that that's reality, right? Yeah. I think that you're right. I think maybe once we get into the weeds of it, you would need a very avant-garde approach of, you want to do this now, whose responsibility is it? Is it the director that's already your director now that now has to do he now has an additional job in addition to his job description to be the side hustler incubator of the company.
Well, yeah. I mean, fundamentally, this is something that unfortunately the days keeps getting pushed back because of personal things and falling sick and stuff. But I have a guest for this series that should be coming on in the next couple of weeks. I don't know if you know him, Marcus Daniels from Highline Beta.
No, I don't.
I think he'll have some interesting stuff to share with our audience on this topic because Highline Beta has been working with corporate clients for a few years now, probably about 6 years, 5 years at least, to build out programming for this.
Wow.
So they actually, now it's not what I'm talking about, it's not what we're talking about per se, but things like, I think one of their clients was Anheuser-Busch that was like, saying, we're a beer company, right? Supply chain concerns us. We need to de-risk it. We also need to de-risk kind of like our bets on particular grains and stuff like that as being the only ones that our product can rely on. Let's create new products. How do we do that in a way that's not just within our classic wheelhouse of product development? And so they create these programs for companies like that. And the program that they created, as far as I recall, for Anheuser-Busch was a climate change incubator. They went real meta with it. They were like, you know what? Our people, our general team is so adept at what they do that we're going to entrust them to continue doing a great job, but we're going to give them access to working on mega problems like water scarcity because it affects our business. Their business is so large that makes sense. But anyway, Highline Beta sets up these programs for companies. So I think there might be some lessons in that experience to say, when you really drill it down to this employee, attribution, or I guess attrition, managing attrition by encouraging employee participation through innovation.
That's also really, two birds, one stone, because it deals with these are really big overarching problems, right? That face humanity, and some people feel really fulfilled
working on those problems.
Yeah, even if it's not their hustle.
Yeah, because otherwise they're disenfranchised from those problems. Their side hustle might be like a scapegoat.
Yeah, it's like you have a lot of employees questioning their company on what they're doing for diversity and inclusion, sometimes not even within the company, but speaking out against examples in the public.
Right.
And it puts certain companies in a really tough spot of well, do we raise our voice every single time this happens?
Right.
It puts CEOs in very tough spots because you're kind of saying, hey, you didn't say something and our company is all behind you. But then, which problems do they speak out for and against? There's I think there are teams that just focus on this. Your PR team could spend all day just trying to find, figure out which problem to tackle. So that's a really interesting concept. I'll keep an eye out for that one.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
And there's so much more to discuss.
Yeah.
I think we put a pin in it now so that our audience can do other things with their day. But it was certainly awesome to have this chat, and I think we didn't at all scratch the surface on what Sonder is and what your company is doing, but the perspective that you shared was great on all these topics.
Yeah, it's well, thank you very much for having me on. It was great to hear all the learnings that you've shared. This is really really cool. I mean, what you got going on here and the topics that you discuss, it floats around, just like you said, it's conversational.
Yeah.
And I'm definitely going to tune in for other episodes.
Excellent.